The events of October 15th, 2021, began like any other in the quiet apartment complex on Oak Street, until the piercing wail of a distress call shattered the calm. Police arrived swiftly, but nothing could have prepared them for the grim discovery that awaited behind those closed doors. Inside the apartment, a scene so haunting unfolded that it would leave scars on those who witnessed it for years to come. Ethan Reed, a 32-year-old high school teacher beloved by students and peers alike, lay motionless in a pool of blood, his lifeless form a stark contrast to the vibrant life he once led. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, Olivia Rogan, a 29-year-old software engineer whose bright career stood in stark opposition to the dark story unraveling before investigators. As they dug deeper, the case morphed from tragic to chilling. They uncovered a labyrinth of control, manipulation, and surveillance, a web Olivia had meticulously spun around Ethan in the months leading to his death. The hidden cameras, positioned with unnerving precision throughout Ethan's apartment, told a silent and sinister story. What began as a relationship founded on affection had gradually transformed into an obsessive descent into paranoia. The tale of Olivia Rogan, now the central figure in this true crime saga, didn't start when she met Ethan. No, her path had been forged long before their lives crossed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia was raised in a quiet Portland suburb, the image of a typical middle-class upbringing. But even from a young age, there were hints that something simmered beneath the surface. Those who knew the family often remarked on Olivia's insatiable need for attention and approval. She was always brilliant, Margaret Rogan later recounted, her voice thick with disbelief in the aftermath of her daughter's arrest. Top of her class, driven like no other. But she never seemed to keep friends for long. At first I thought she was just shy. As the years passed, the patterns of possessiveness only grew. By the time Olivia was a teenager, these tendencies were impossible to ignore. Alex Chen, her high school boyfriend, would later reveal to investigators the full extent of her controlling nature. She had to know where I was at all times, he confessed. I'd get constant calls, texts. I didn't answer fast enough, she'd show up out of nowhere. Still, no one could deny her academic prowess. Olivia graduated at the top of her high school class, valedictorian with honors, and then moved on to Stanford University to pursue a degree in computer science. But while her brilliance shone in the classroom, her controlling behavior found a new outlet: technology. Her roommate Sarah Jennings would later recall Olivia's unsettling fascination with surveillance and coding. She was a genius, no doubt about it, Sarah admitted, but she didn't just use her skills for classwork. She'd casually mention things about people, things she couldn't have known unless she'd been snooping digitally. Upon graduating, Olivia's career seemed destined for greatness. She landed a coveted job at a rising tech startup, praised by colleagues for her drive and meticulous attention to detail. But her personal life remained a minefield of volatile, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, a boyfriend from 2019, described their 6-month relationship as an emotional roller coaster. She wanted to be inside my head, Jason recalled with a shudder. She needed to know every thought, every plan. And when I tried to set boundaries, she'd twist things around, manipulate the situation until I felt like the bad guy. It was suffocating. In the months leading up to Ethan Reed's tragic death, it became clear that Olivia's need for control had escalated to dangerous heights. The hidden cameras, the obsessive monitoring of his every move, what might have seemed at first like concern or affection, had morphed into something far more menacing. The woman who had once been celebrated for her brilliance had now descended into a world of control and paranoia, leaving behind a trail of devastation and loss. As the investigation continues, one thing remains painfully clear. The story of Ethan Reed and Olivia Rogan is not just one of love gone wrong. It is a harrowing reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the surface, where brilliance and obsession collide. Olivia Rogan's return to Ashland in early 2020 was quiet, almost unnoticed, as she settled into a remote position with her company. On the surface, it was simply another chapter in her professional ascent. Yet beneath that exterior, she had left behind a fractured path of broken relationships, none of which had prepared those who knew her for the turn her life was about to take. When she met Ethan Reed, her life seemed poised to change once more, but not in the way anyone could have anticipated. Ethan's life was, in many ways, the polar opposite of Olivia's. Born in 1990 in Ashland, he was the youngest of 3 children in a family that radiated warmth and stability. His sister, Amanda Reed, often spoke of their idyllic childhood, a time spent surrounded by nature's beauty. "We were always outdoors," she recalled with a wistful smile. "Summers hiking through the mountains, winters skiing down the slopes. Ethan was the glue of our family, always the peacemaker. From an early age, it was clear that Ethan had a passion for learning and an innate ability to connect with those around him. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him as a bright, kind student with a remarkable enthusiasm for literature. He brought out the best in people, Mrs. Hoffman reflected. He had this infectious energy in the classroom, the kind of student who lifted others up. And he did. After graduating from university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. He was the embodiment of stability. His relationships were steady, his friendships long-lasting. Even after parting ways with his college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, their friendship remained intact. Ethan was just, Laura said, her voice warm with fond memories. He was loyal, independent, but never detached. There was no drama between us. We just wanted different things career-wise. In May 2020, on a warm and sunlit Saturday afternoon, fate brought Ethan and Olivia together at the local farmers market. Olivia, still adjusting to her new surroundings in Ashland, had ventured out to explore. Ethan, a familiar face at the market, was picking up produce as he always did, an easygoing presence among the vendors and townsfolk. It was by pure chance that their eyes met across a display of organic apples. Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a casual conversation about the best varieties for baking, what seemed like an innocent exchange at the time. But that conversation lingered. Olivia, charmed by Ethan's warm smile and easy nature, found herself staying longer than she intended. Their talk meandered from apples to a shared passion for classic literature, and before long they were deep in discussion about their favorite novels. Olivia, with her sharp wit and intellect, quickly caught Ethan's attention. He suggested a hike the following weekend, and without hesitation Olivia agreed. That first hike, up Grizzly Peak, marked the beginning of something new. The trek was as beautiful as it was symbolic. The sweeping views of the Rogue Valley served as a breathtaking backdrop to their budding connection. Ethan's close friend Mark would later recall the transformation in Ethan after that day. He came back from that hike on cloud nine, Mark said, laughing softly at the memory. He couldn't stop talking about Olivia, how smart she was, how easy the conversation flowed. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Olivia's relationship deepened with a rapid intensity. They spent countless hours together, hiking, reading, cooking, and exploring the world of each other's minds. But while Ethan was steady and open, Olivia's patterns of control began to subtly creep into their relationship, though initially masked by her charm and intelligence. What began as innocent curiosity slowly shifted into something more insidious, a need to know more, to be ever present in Ethan's life. At first, Ethan, ever the optimist, saw it as affection. But as the weeks stretched into months, the subtle possessiveness began to surface. Olivia's casual check-ins became constant. Her curiosity about Ethan's day-to-day life evolved into a need to know every detail. And yet, blinded by the whirlwind romance and the shared passions that had initially brought them together, Ethan dismissed the red flags. Friends noticed the shift, but Ethan, always giving the benefit of the doubt, chalked it up to the excitement of a new relationship. In hindsight, it became clear that the seeds of control had been planted early. And while Ethan's friends saw the change in him, they could never have predicted the darkness that lay ahead. How the woman who had charmed him with her wit and intelligence would eventually pull him into a web of manipulation from which he would never escape. Olivia and Ethan's relationship grew quickly, almost too perfectly, as the two spent countless evenings lost in deep discussions about books, sharing home-cooked meals, and wandering through the serene landscapes of Southern Oregon. To the outside world, they seemed like a match made in heaven. A couple whose shared love of nature and intellectual pursuits made them inseparable. Yet even in these early days, subtle cracks began to form, though they were easy to overlook, especially for Ethan, who was consumed by the intoxicating rush of new love. Amanda, Ethan's older sister, was one of the first to notice the faint yet troubling signs. Olivia's presence became all-consuming. She seemed to monopolize Ethan's time, always calling or texting when they weren't together. Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia was creating excuses to prevent Ethan from spending time with his family. Family gatherings became a rarity, and whenever Ethan tried to join, Olivia found a way to be there, as if she couldn't bear the thought of him being apart from her. Ethan, blinded by the allure of their blossoming relationship, brushed off these concerns. When his friend Mark voiced a quiet worry about how intense things had gotten, Ethan laughed, his voice light with amusement. "She's just excited about us," he said with a smile. But the unsettling truth was that things wouldn't calm down. In fact, they were only beginning to spiral. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had practically moved into Ethan's apartment. There was no formal conversation or agreement. She simply began spending more and more time there until her presence became permanent. Olivia's influence over Ethan's life deepened. What he ate, how he spent his weekends, who he saw. Everything was touched by Olivia's increasingly tightening grip. It was subtle at first, a suggestion here, a casual remark there, but soon her control was undeniable. Jessica Lawson, a fellow English teacher at Ashland High School and one of Ethan's closest friends at work, noticed the changes in him too. Ethan, who once thrived on the camaraderie of post-work gatherings and happy hours, now turned down every invitation. He used to love grabbing drinks after school, Jessica recalled, her voice tinged with concern. But then he started saying things like, "Olivia's not comfortable with me being out late," which was strange because she'd come with us before. Friends saw a shift in his online presence too. Ethan, once lively and active on social media, became distant. His Facebook and Instagram feeds, once filled with personal updates and photos from his adventures, grew sparse and oddly impersonal. When questioned about it, Ethan waved it off with a shrug, saying he was simply trying to be more private. But it wasn't privacy he was seeking. It was Olivia's growing control over his every action that was quietly isolating him. The most troubling behavior, however, was Olivia's attempts to sever Ethan's ties with his own family. The Reeds, a close-knit family, always held a big Christmas celebration at their parents' house. It was a tradition that Ethan had never missed. But in December 2020, just before the holiday, Amanda got a call from Ethan. He and Olivia wouldn't be able to attend. It was strange, Amanda said, her voice quiet with concern. He said Olivia wasn't feeling well, but I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. As time went on, Olivia's manipulation grew more sophisticated, more dangerous. She oscillated between showering Ethan with affection and punishing him with cold, stone-faced silences if he didn't bend to her will. It was a classic pattern of emotional control designed to keep Ethan off balance and unsure of himself. Mark, Ethan's longtime friend, recalled a camping trip they had been planning for months. The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded defeated, like something had been drained out of him. He told me Olivia was upset that he was going without her, even though we had invited her and she had turned it down. As 2021 wore on, Olivia's behavior escalated. The woman who had once charmed Ethan with her wit and intellect had morphed into someone ruled by paranoia and jealousy. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, even though there was no evidence to support her suspicions. The accusations came out of nowhere, blindsiding Ethan and further isolating him. She began appearing unannounced at Ashland High School, often bringing lunch for Ethan under the guise of a loving gesture. But her true motive was clear to those who observed her. She wasn't there just to see Ethan. She was scanning the room, watching his interactions with students and colleagues as though searching for some imagined betrayal. Ethan's colleagues noticed the tension that followed her visits, the way his shoulders tightened when she was around, the way his bright and easy smile faded whenever Olivia entered the room. Student Emma Chen would later recount a particularly unsettling encounter with Olivia that left a lasting impression. "Miss Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break," she testified. "Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us weird questions about him, things that felt way too personal. It was uncomfortable, like she was fishing for something. Olivia's presence loomed, her behavior growing more invasive, more controlling. And yet, despite the mounting evidence of her manipulative tendencies, Ethan remained steadfast in his commitment to her. Those closest to Ethan could see the changes in him. His once calm demeanor gave way to signs of stress and anxiety. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. His easy laughter grew more strained, and his once bright energy was slowly dimming. But whenever friends or family voiced their concerns, Ethan deflected. His loyalty to Olivia seemed unshakable, and he often made excuses for her increasingly erratic behavior. In the summer of 2021, Ethan's sister Amanda couldn't hold her worries back any longer. She confronted him, her heart heavy with concern. "I told him outright that I was worried, that whatever was happening between him and Olivia wasn't healthy. He just got defensive, like I was attacking her. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she had a hard past and needed more reassurance than most people. But no amount of reassurance could quell Olivia's deepening paranoia. As summer slipped into fall, her need for control spiraled into something darker, more dangerous. By late August 2021, Olivia made a decision that would seal the fate of their relationship, leading it down a path from which there would be no return. Ethan had a weekend teaching conference to attend, an event he had been looking forward to. But while he was away, Olivia's mind raced. The fear of losing him gnawed at her constantly. The belief that he was hiding something festered in her mind. Her background in software engineering made what came next all too easy. Fueled by jealousy and irrational suspicion, Olivia decided to install hidden cameras throughout Ethan's apartment, an action that would change everything. The plan had been taking shape in Olivia's mind for weeks, her technical skills making the logistics almost simple. She justified it in her mind. If she could see everything, she would finally find peace, finally trust him. So, with chilling precision, she executed her plan. She purchased tiny, high-definition cameras designed to be indistinguishable from ordinary objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a seemingly harmless potted plant. When Ethan left for his conference that Friday afternoon, Olivia didn't waste time. Armed with a key she had under the pretense of emergencies, she entered his apartment. For the next several hours, Olivia moved with a terrifying focus. She placed the cameras in key locations, his living room, kitchen, bedroom, even the bathroom, ensuring there wasn't a corner of his life she couldn't monitor. She set up sophisticated software to access the feeds remotely, from her phone or laptop, watching every move he made without him ever knowing. As she locked the door behind her and left Ethan's apartment, Olivia's heart raced with a dizzying mix of anticipation and guilt. She convinced herself that this was necessary, that once she saw he had nothing to hide, her fears would melt away. She would trust him fully. Everything would be fine. But in the days that followed, Olivia's plan didn't provide the reassurance she sought. Quite the opposite. The first few days of footage showed nothing but the mundane details of Ethan's life, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting with his sister Amanda over the phone. There was no hint of infidelity, no secret life being uncovered. Yet instead of calming her, the absence of evidence only deepened Olivia's suspicions. She became obsessed with the smallest details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he looking at through the window? Was there something happening that the cameras couldn't catch? Her paranoia consumed her. At work, Olivia's behavior grew erratic. Colleagues noticed her distracted nature, the way her attention seemed to drift constantly back to her phone. David Cho, a fellow software engineer, recalled a moment that struck him as odd. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a live video feed, but before I could say anything, she closed it, quick, like she didn't want anyone to see. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's need for control escalated. Monitoring Ethan became an obsession, one that bled into every corner of her life. Olivia's obsession with the hidden camera feeds consumed her every waking moment. She stopped focusing on her work, lost sleep, and her interactions with Ethan grew increasingly tense. Keeping her secret weighed heavily on her, making it harder to maintain the facade of normalcy. Ethan, on the other hand, began to feel the subtle shifts in his own environment, though he couldn't yet make sense of them. One evening, while casually reaching for a book from his shelf, Ethan noticed something peculiar. Several volumes were slightly out of place. He had organized them just a few days ago, and the change nagged at him. Later in the bathroom, he saw that his toiletries had been rearranged as well, though he couldn't quite remember exactly how. These small disturbances might have been easy to overlook, but what unsettled him the most were the moments he felt like he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in his living room, lost in thought, and suddenly feel a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if unseen eyes were upon him. But every time he glanced up, he found himself alone. Jessica Lawson, Ethan's friend and colleague, noticed his growing unease. He mentioned it to me once, that he felt on edge at home. He laughed it off, said it was probably just stress from work, but I could tell it was really bothering him, Jessica recalled later. The tension between Ethan and Olivia continued to build, but Ethan, ever trusting, never imagined the true source of his discomfort. It wasn't long before Olivia's surveillance slipped into their conversations, feeding Ethan's growing suspicion. She would casually comment on things she shouldn't have known. Once she mentioned in passing how much she liked the new brand of coffee he had bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, even though he was sure he hadn't mentioned it. When Ethan asked how she knew these things, Olivia deflected, offering vague explanations. As these unsettling moments added up, Ethan began to question himself. Was he being paranoid? Was work stress clouding his mind? The more he tried to rationalize it, the less sense it made, yet the nagging discomfort lingered. He started paying closer attention to his surroundings, noting the smallest details, the way objects shifted in his apartment, the odd moments of inexplicable knowledge Olivia seemed to possess. He considered talking to his sister Amanda, but the thought of sounding irrational or paranoid kept him silent. The truth would not stay hidden for long. One fateful evening in October 2021, Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop casting shadows across the living room. Fatigued and ready for bed, he stretched and in the process, knocked over a small potted plant from the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, spilling soil and shards of ceramic across the room. Cursing under his breath, Ethan knelt down to clean up the mess. It was then that he saw it. Among the debris, something caught his eye, a tiny lens no bigger than a pencil eraser, gleaming faintly in the low light. He stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he had just found. As he picked it up, realization hit him like a wave, washing away any lingering doubts or attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences in his life. He wasn't imagining things. He wasn't overreacting. He had been watched, monitored in the most intimate corners of his life by someone he trusted. The camera was real. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he carefully extracted the miniature camera from the soil, its cold metallic surface reflecting the dim light of the room. His fingers trembled as he turned it over, feeling the weight of the realization crashing down on him. This wasn't an accident or some random act of surveillance. It was deliberate, intentional, and meticulously planned. Olivia had been watching him, violating the sacred privacy of his life in the most intimate spaces. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Ethan began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered more hidden cameras, one embedded in the smoke detector, another cleverly hidden in the frame of a picture on his dresser, and chillingly, one inside the shower head. Each discovery sent a fresh wave of nausea and betrayal washing over him. He felt as though every aspect of his life, every private thought, action, and moment, had been invaded. His mind raced as he connected the dots. The strange, seemingly harmless comments Olivia had made about his daily routines, the uncanny way she seemed to know things he hadn't told her, the gut-wrenching feeling of being watched. It all made horrifying sense now. Olivia, the woman he had loved and trusted, had been spying on him. The betrayal was suffocating. In a daze, Ethan did the only thing he could think of. He called Amanda. It was well past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, instantly alert to the distress in his voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice edged with concern. Through shaky breaths and a voice thick with emotion, Ethan recounted the events of the night. He told her about the cameras, about the months of unease he had tried to dismiss, and how it had all come crashing down in one horrific moment of clarity. Amanda listened, her initial disbelief quickly morphing into anger and protectiveness over her younger brother. "You need to get out of there," she said firmly. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted nothing more than to confront Olivia, to demand answers, to make her face the hurt she had caused. Another part of him was numb, unable to process the betrayal fully, struggling to reconcile the loving woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a deep violation of his trust. In the end, Amanda's voice guided him. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras. Save any recordings you can find." As dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat in his living room, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, and when he looked down, he saw a message from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well." The irony of her message struck him hard. For months she had likely watched him sleep through the lenses of those cameras, monitoring his every move under the guise of love and care. With a deep breath, Ethan typed out a response that would set the wheels of their tragic ending in motion. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The hours crawled by until Olivia arrived, her usual smile lighting up her face as she walked into the apartment. She leaned in for a kiss, but when she caught sight of Ethan's grim expression and the dismantled cameras strewn across the coffee table, her face froze. Her eyes flicked from Ethan to the cameras, the weight of her actions now visible in every taut line of her body. For a moment, the room was suffocating with silence. Olivia's confident demeanor crumbled before Ethan's eyes, tears welling up and threatening to spill over. "Ethan, I can explain," she stammered, her voice shaking as panic gripped her. But Ethan, his voice low and filled with a controlled fury, cut her off before she could continue. "Explain," he said, his words deliberate and cold. "How do you explain betraying the trust of someone who loved you?" Each word he spoke seemed to shrink Olivia further. She stood there, unable to meet his gaze as her usual confident facade withered away. The reality of what she had done, of how deeply she had violated the boundaries of their relationship, hit her like a tidal wave, and there was no place to hide. With every sentence Ethan uttered, the trust they once shared dissolved. leaving nothing but the wreckage of deception and control. Olivia tried to speak again, but her voice faltered under the weight of her guilt, her lips quivering as she choked back sobs. She had nothing left, no words, no excuses, no defense for what she had done. Ethan stood there, unyielding, the pain in his voice cutting through the fragile silence of the room. You watched me, Olivia. You monitored my every move. And in that moment, they both knew their relationship was beyond repair. The trust had been shattered, and with it, any hope of reconciliation. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia grasped for any justification she could find, her voice desperate and pleading. She spoke of her deep-rooted insecurities, the fear of losing him, the endless anxiety that had driven her to install the cameras. I was so scared, Ethan, she cried. I just needed to know. I needed to prove to myself that you were loyal. Then I could finally relax. We could finally be happy. Her words tumbled out in a torrent, heavy with emotion, but Ethan's expression remained stoic, unmoved by her frantic attempt to explain away her actions. I can't be with someone who would do this, he said, his voice calm yet firm. We're done, Olivia. The atmosphere shifted. In an instant, Olivia's tearful demeanor evaporated, replaced by an icy rage that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Her eyes narrowed and her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. You can't do this to me, she hissed. We're perfect together. You're overreacting. When Ethan stood his ground, her desperation morphed into malice. The pleas turned to threats, each one more vicious than the last. I'll ruin your career, she spat. I'll show your students and colleagues every embarrassing thing I've caught on camera. I have it all, Ethan. Every moment. You'll be humiliated. Her words were laced with venom, but even this failed to break Ethan's resolve. He could see through the manipulation, through the anger, to the emptiness behind her threats. When her attempts to control him with fear didn't work, Olivia's tone changed again. She resorted to emotional blackmail, her voice quivering as she threatened to harm herself if Ethan didn't take her back. The shift was jarring, but Ethan, though shaken, remained resolute. His heart ached to see the woman he once loved spiral into desperation. But he knew there was no coming back from this. The betrayal was too deep. Finally, realizing her words held no power over him anymore, Olivia's face twisted with fury. She stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. Ethan sank onto the couch, utterly drained. He thought the worst was over, that the nightmare had ended with her departure. But Olivia's obsession had not yet reached its peak, and what was to come would be far more dangerous. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever scar the town of Ashland. What began as an ordinary autumn day gave no warning of the tragedy that would unfold by nightfall. Ethan, emotionally raw from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning on the phone with Amanda, discussing the steps they would take to file a police report about the cameras. His mind was still spinning, but Amanda's steady guidance helped him formulate a plan to begin the process of rebuilding his life. As the afternoon crept toward evening, Ethan decided to take a walk, hoping the crisp air would clear his head. He left his phone behind, not wanting to deal with the barrage of desperate texts he was certain Olivia would send. He walked for hours, trying to shake the growing dread in the pit of his stomach, unaware that Olivia was making her final move. At some point during his absence, Olivia had returned. Neighbors would later describe seeing her enter the building, her face set in grim determination. She used the key she still had to let herself into Ethan's apartment, her thoughts a chaotic mix of anger, desperation, and a delusional sense of righteousness. In her mind, she wasn't committing a crime. She was fighting for the relationship she believed was meant to be. She sat in the dark, waiting for Ethan to return. When Ethan walked through the door around 7 p.m., he was immediately struck by the stillness in the room. It was dark, too dark, and the hairs on the back of his neck prickled with unease. As his eyes adjusted, he saw her, Olivia, sitting silently in the living room, her face illuminated only by the faint glow from a streetlight filtering through the blinds. Olivia? His voice trembled. Her response was unnervingly calm, almost detached. We're going to fix this, Ethan, she said quietly. You'll see. What followed was a heated argument, escalating quickly from tension to chaos. Olivia vacillated wildly between begging for another chance and lashing out with cruel accusations, her emotions swinging from one extreme to the other in a desperate bid to regain control. Ethan, his patience worn thin, demanded she leave. He couldn't take the emotional whiplash any longer. And then, in a moment that would send shockwaves through everyone who knew them, Olivia's fragile grip on reality snapped. In a movement so swift it barely registered at first, she pulled a kitchen knife from her bag, one she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The blade gleamed in the dim light, a terrible reflection of her unraveling mind. Ethan froze, his heart pounding as he stared at the weapon in her hand. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. But Olivia's eyes were wild, filled with a twisted determination. "We're not done," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You're not leaving me, Ethan." The next moments unfolded in a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught completely off guard by the sudden escalation, instinctively tried to reason with Olivia as he backed away from the gleaming blade in her hand. His pleas fell on deaf ears. Olivia, no longer tethered to reason, lunged forward with terrifying force. In that instant, Ethan's training as a high school wrestler kicked in. He managed to grapple with her, desperately trying to disarm her without causing serious harm. But Olivia, driven by an irrational frenzy, seemed to possess an unnatural strength, fueled by rage and desperation. Neighbors would later report hearing muffled shouting followed by the sound of shattering glass. Concerned by the commotion, one of them dialed 911, but it was too late. By the time the police broke down the door to Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already reached its devastating conclusion. Ethan lay motionless on the floor, his body marred by multiple stab wounds. His breath was shallow, life slipping away as his eyes dimmed. Beside him, Olivia sat with the bloody knife still clutched tightly in her hand, her vacant gaze fixed on the lifeless form of the man she had claimed to love. When paramedics rushed in, desperately attempting to save Ethan, Olivia remained still, offering no resistance as the police moved in to take her into custody. The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the disturbing extent of Olivia's surveillance operation. The digital trail of hidden cameras meticulously planted to spy on Ethan's most private moments revealed months of invasive monitoring. Paired with physical evidence from the crime scene and statements from neighbors and friends, the case painted a chilling picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were left devastated, struggling to come to terms with the tragedy. Amanda, his sister, was particularly tormented by guilt. In a tearful interview, she confided, "I knew something was wrong. I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." The weight of what-ifs and regrets lingered, casting a dark shadow over the Reed family's grief. As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with harrowing stories of her controlling behavior, emotional manipulation, and escalating paranoia. Olivia's parents, overwhelmed with shock and grief over their daughter's actions, could offer little more than tearful apologies to Ethan's grieving family. In court, the district attorney methodically presented a damning case, walking the jury through the tragic progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The surveillance footage, cold, stark evidence of Ethan's privacy being systematically violated, became the focal point. Olivia's invasive actions, paired with the chilling end to their relationship, left little room for doubt. The defense didn't contest the facts, but instead focused on Olivia's mental health, calling in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that her actions were not those of a cold-blooded murderer, but the result of a mental health crisis spiraling out of control. When Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony left the courtroom uneasy. It was an unsettling mix of remorse and rationalization. She spoke tearfully of her deep love for Ethan, her crippling fear of abandonment, and how she never intended to hurt him. Yet her lack of comprehension about the gravity of her actions, her inability to fully grasp the depth of the betrayal, left many disturbed, unsure of how to reconcile her emotional instability with the violence she had inflicted. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge did not mince words. He delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions, condemning her calculated invasion of Ethan's life and her failure to recognize the boundaries of love and trust. He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland began the slow process of healing, the case left a deep and lasting impact on the community. The brutal nature of Ethan's death shocked the town, but it was the underlying themes, the invasion of privacy, the unchecked possessiveness, the toxic dynamics that had spiraled into tragedy, that resonated most. Ethan's murder became a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing harmful relationship patterns before they escalate to catastrophic ends. Ethan Reed's legacy, in the end, was not just the tragedy of his death, but the change it spurred. Ashland began to speak more openly about the dangers of toxic relationships, emotional manipulation, and the importance of mental health awareness. For many, the case served as a catalyst for difficult conversations and a renewed commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future. And so, while the memory of October 15, 2021 would forever linger as a day of profound loss, it also became a reminder of the delicate line between love and control, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty.